Hello and welcome to this video on coaching processes. The goal of this video is to analyze my personal coaching philosophy and style and its strengths and weaknesses, as well as to discuss areas of improvement within my coaching technique. Before I outline what I consider to be my coaching philosophy, I want to highlight that I consider trust to be the most important element of any athlete-coach relationship. And of course, trust is a two-way road. The athlete needs to trust the expertise and the process, as well as having a personal trust into the coach and his or her care and emotional support. The coach needs to trust the athlete's commitment and dedication towards the defined goal. Before continuing this discussion further, just a little insight into the training session shown here. This is one of my athletes who I have been working with for over 2 years. An interesting fact about this athlete is that her left femur is 9 centimeters shorter than the right. She has since childhood adapted to walking on the toes of the left foot, rather than wearing insoles or any support. When we started training, which by the way she was always told she couldn't do, we decided to use a customized block whenever necessary to avoid imbalances and impact in her spinal alignment. This athlete now is really passionate about weightlifting, and our main goal is to further develop her body awareness, as her normal is not necessarily aiding her lifting. In example, she is used to having a hip tilt and uneven weight distribution through the lower lips. Now, what is my coaching philosophy? When I started working on this video content, I brainstormed a list of important elements of my coaching methodology. The words and synonyms that I repeated frequently in my list included body awareness, motor control, movement training, healthy movement, sustainability, proprioception, and skill development. Looking at this list, I think it is safe to jump ahead and highlight a potential flaw of my coaching style. I am not too concerned about immediate performance, achievement, and winning, but rather in developing long-term goals. And going back to my previous point on trust, this is a very important point for discussion when I engage in a new coach-athlete relationship. What I'm saying here is that if I'm meeting an athlete who is very concerned about winning in the short term, I will probably not be the best coach for them. So my coaching goal is to develop movement skill, kinesthetic awareness, and motor control in a sustainable manner, to allow the athlete to perform long-term and effectively in their sport. My definition of motor control is that it is a learned skill, which results from practicing new movements in various ways and ultimately creates new neural patterns. This results in a feedback chain, including perception, neural signals, and joint receptors. Once an athlete possesses sufficient motor control, he then has movement and alignment competence. So the feedback chain reports about the movement and alignment and signals to the brain if the movements performed match the learned skill. At this point, the athlete is less dependent on the coach, and he or she now has their own feedback system. How do we teach this? An important factor here is the intrinsic learning experience. Intrinsic learning means that data is experienced and processed through the somatosensory system. In short, the athlete needs to do and practice a move in order to have the intrinsic learning effect. To highlight the difference, extrinsic learning is the intellectual understanding of instructions and techniques. Both intrinsic and extrinsic are important in skill acquisition, but often the focus in coaching is too much on the extrinsic learning, which keeps the athlete dependent on feedback by the coach. In example, the athlete will be looking at the coach for verbal or visual feedback, rather than developing the necessary skills to feel if a movement is correct or not. There are many great coaches acknowledging this, and are therefore providing minimal instructions and rather ask questions that may lead the athlete to their own answers. When focusing on intrinsic learning, I think it is important to engage in the practice of the skill itself, not only the results. And also to acknowledge a simple fact: every small movement is a skill. I often include corrective exercises into my sessions to develop kinesthetic awareness and to teach the athlete what activation of a specific muscles feel like. This is no guarantee that this can then be implemented into a more complex movement. However, it does often make it easier to integrate. Now, let's look a little bit into brain science and the way we process information. When we start learning a new skill, the three major brain areas that are involved in laying down new pathways are the prefrontal cortex, the parietal cortex, and the cerebellum. However, with more experience and training, these areas show less activity and the motor cortex becomes more engaged. I'm mentioning this because we often talk about muscle memory, when really we should be talking about brain memory. So by practicing movements over and over again, new brain pathways are created, and we develop awareness and a feedback chain that helps us to measure the movement and skill against what our body has memorized to be the correct way. This kind of autonomy is highly empowering for the athlete. The next point of discussion is how a coach can create this intrinsic learning experience. I mentioned earlier that encouraging the athlete to listen to their own body and feedback chain is highly important. Looking back at the videos, I realized that this is one big area of improvement for myself. Whilst I am conscious of this fact, I should spend more time asking for biofeedback by my athlete. Another concept to consider here is the learning style of the athlete. As every person is different, we also have different learning styles, i.e. visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or mixed styles. I won't explain in detail what these learning profiles entail, as they can be easily researched online. Stephen Smith and Cadoret conducted a study to examine dominance profiles in learning behaviors in athletes. They found that coaches often ignore how their athlete process cognitive information. If a coach is aware of the different learning styles, they can include specific techniques into the teaching environment and enrich learning and possibly impact performance. Personally, I like to ask my athletes if they already know their preferred learning style, or if they are unaware of the concept, observe their body language, ability to listen, or if not they mimic me immediately when shown a new movement. Teaching to learning styles is quite widely researched, even so not necessarily in an athletic context. It is certainly a very interesting area, which I consider highly important in improving my coaching skills. Whilst I couldn't find exact numbers and percentiles, most people are considered to be visual learners, around 40 to 50%, followed by auditory, around 30%, and kinesthetic learners, around 20%. The rest of the population is said to be a mix of the three learning types. This is interesting when we consider that traditional learning and coaching sessions often consist of much talking and therefore listening by the athletes. And this would mean that we do not reach most of our non-auditory athletes with a traditional coaching approach. The two athletes in the videos shown today are mainly auditory visual for the first one and visual kinesthetic for the second athlete. I am giving much more visual cues in the second video compared to the first, in which the athlete is learning new alignment skills. In summary, as a coach, I strive to create movement competency, body awareness, and motor control. I have learned that I need to ask more specific questions to encourage the athlete to have an intrinsic learning experience. I hope to find the correct learning style to support each client as good as possible. The weakness of my coaching philosophy is that it may not produce immediate short-term success if winning is the predominant goal of the athlete. The strength of my coaching style is sustainability and long-term improvement of movement competency. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video.